We are recording. This is now section 4. I'll jump back to the actual slides here in a moment, but let's just go ahead and jump into the bread and butter. If you're watching this recording later, go ahead and get this out, at least the first few pages, and make some notes. And then those of you attending live, we're going to do some clicking and going back and forth. Excuse me. We had some questions in the break, and this is where I'll address it now about the presentation, the closing disclosure, and what if it's out of order and things like that. So, as Brenda mentioned, we move this to the front because this can be boring. A lot of people are like, look, I just want to know a closing package. I've been on YouTube and I kind of know. Well, I'm gonna throw some nuggets to you. I'm gonna drop some coins. I'm gonna drop it like it's hot. I think I got all the slang from all the hip young people out of the way. All right. So I'm gonna kind of go off script, off topic here. The biggest thing I find, and Brenda and I have visited on when we both, and when we had careers, where we were signing agents part time, then full time, and then just in between, and we share the, I don't want to say fear, but the apprehension of, oh my gosh, okay, I've got my credentials, I got all this, I'm getting phone calls and offers, but I really kind of don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was the fear of the loan package or the documents, and so I haven't done signings in months because of COVID. So when I go back out, I'm going to kind of, run to that same issue. So over many, many years, I've always called it the Fab Five. If you hear anybody else say that, just know Jake started that many decades ago. But, anyways, when you get a closing package, depending on your state, depending on the type of signing it is, and there's a lot of variables to really know, okay, what's standard practice? What is there like a standard speech? What can I do to where the people trust me the moment we sit down and there's a good flow to where it limits the hiccups? And so the best way to do that are the Fab Five documents. So you might want to write this down. I know we're going to have a couple of slides, especially right here that I'll show you. But I think when you write it down, it just kind of resonates in your memory and then you can go back and reference it. So if you can write down on a, if you have an open area or a scratched piece of paper, go to the, make two columns, one to the left, one to the right. On the left hand side, call it purchase. And on the right, call it refinance because there's one or two documents that will change in your Fab Five. So later we'll talk about your hiring party's instructions. You have to adhere to that. And I kind of compare it to the medical field as a former medic. It's your scope of practice, it's your outline of your expectations. So you want to meet that. In those instructions, if it tells you, do not move these out of order, well, obviously you don't want to do that. But it's important that you do the Fab Five first. So just to kind of extinguish that, that's when you want to probably either do little flags or post-it notes or something that you can kind of put it to the side and then number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and still go over it in that order, but then go back and mix it back in the way that the client wants you to return it at. So hopefully that answers that question we had during the break. But the Fab Five on your left hand column, let's just go ahead and write them down, is going to be your closing disclosure slash HUD or settlement statement. And let me just click right here so you can pull it up and see too. It's going to be the first payment letter. It's going to be the note and deed of trust, and then escrow agreement. And then on your right-hand column, repeat the same thing, but instead of escrow agreement, you're going to do notice of right to cancel as number 5.
Agent world, it's known as the TC.
Right. And sometimes I do RTC, majig, thingamabob, and we're like, all right. So the reason why you bring these to the front is It's not just to get rid of the heebie-jeebies and the nerves, but this is what I do across the board. And my former or colleagues, we did the same thing. It just gave it such a natural flow. So ideally, you are giving your signer all or just those 5 documents usually answers all their questions up front. By the time you sign them and or they sign them and you notarize as needed and you go through them, that's usually a quarter of the entire loan package. Conversation wise, it's almost 50% of what you need to do. If you master those 5 documents as far as your speech and your presentation of them, then everything else is so easy. And you're like, well, Jake, that sounds good, but what do you mean by that? So let's talk about the closing disclosure. Earlier, we are using the vocabulary and the terms, and we call it CD, and you'll hear that. If it's a residential transaction, and we have more later on a slide that tells you what qualifies for the use of a CD, but with the CFPB that came about, the lender has to disclose that 3 days prior to you meeting with your signer. Now, a lot of times you'll hear the signer say, well, I never got that. It can go to their spam folder. They could have mailed it. There's all kinds of things. But people are no longer blindsided. You don't just show up and they're just like, oh my gosh, the fees are all wrong. Now, they may vary from time to time, but because of that and the disclosures and all the things that are required after 2015, your cancellation rate is significantly less than it was 6 years ago. Your you being the bad guy just because you bring the documents and now they're paying $6,000 more and no one told them and your fault, because you're the first person they ever met face to face. That's mostly gone now. So again, you are jumping in at the right time in this business. So that closing disclosure is going to look just like this. It is a promulgated form set by the higher power. So all of your federal entities got together and the CFPB enforces the use of this form. But what's so nice is it's going to show all their terms up front. So if you make this your first document, they know exactly what their terms are, the loan amount, the interest rate, their monthly principal and interest. And of course, I'm focusing on this section. And then back in the day, the question is, do I have a prepayment penalty? Do I have this? Do I have that? And then now all this is itemized in a yes or no response. And then this section here is usually going to go over their full payment. So you're going to have their principal and interest brought down, mortgage insurance and escrow amount, hazard insurance or whatever, and the total payment. I said that quickly because I meant to intentionally overwhelm you because I promise you I'm going to make this easy for you. Then at the bottom, it's going to tell you closing costs. Well, what do you mean? 14,147.26. You need to collect that. If you were not aware, yes, you're going to be collecting funds, and sometimes those funds may be two, three, four, $500,000. We'll talk more about that. Page 2, and this is a refinance closing disclosure, by the way. No, it's the full one. Okay, so it's going to give them their costs from the lender, the costs from third party fees, and then services that the lender. Let me back up. These are services the lender requires, but they're the third parties. They're not lender's fees. And then this is anything else that's required in the transaction. This is our catch-all where the title company fees usually are. Then we've got record fees. We've got the prepaids, which are things that are required for the future but collected in advance. Then you've got the escrows for the upcoming tax installment. And then here's one more catch-all, and there's more, and there's more. And you're gonna have to explain all this. Just kidding. This is all you're gonna do. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, here's your closing disclosure. Your terms are listed here in the middle. Can you go ahead and give these a quick look over and a glance? Your out of pocket today is 14,147.26. If you got that in a cashier's check or a personal check or whatever the hiring party allows, let's go ahead and collect that now while I have your IDs and I can finish up my journal. And then the rest of the page 2 and 3 is going to go over your itemization as to all fees. But you probably have already seen all this, so I'm going to let you look at this while I work on my journal. At the very end, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I need your signature on the last page. I explain one of the most important documents. So there is more to it. Over time, you'll have a little bit more of a way to present that. But here's the thing, because this has all the numbers and it does have a little bit more to it, but that's just for now. That I'm okay telling you to explain it that way. Let me go back up here. So when we say explain, you're not to ever explain a document because we are not barred attorneys. Anyone that is a barred attorney or is in the legal profession and maybe you're underneath an attorney, you have to establish your role. So let me just leave that for that audience. But for everyone else, we have to be very careful that we do not cross what we call UPL, which is the unauthorized practice of law. So the best way I can sum that up as you start doing your loan presentation is if your signer or the big fish, anyone at that table, if they ask you a question and your response back to them could influence their decision now or in the future, in my opinion, you've crossed that line where you're giving legal advice. So recently in a thread online, it was a really good conversation that two people had their own personal attorney, and the attorney said, you can answer the what questions, but not the why questions. For instance, why is my rate 3.875? They said that was okay. But then no one gave an example of the what. So when you look at this document, what if your signer says, what happens if I don't make my payment? What happens if I only pay $600 and not the 1,050? If you answer that, you crossed over UPL. You've also crossed and presented yourself as a licensed loan officer. And so it can get you a lot of trouble. So you want to avoid the questions. What we do is if it's something you know the answer to reasonably, rather than tell them, you can show them. So in other words, the rate's 3.875. You go down like midway the package, like, you know what? What exactly was my rate again? Because it changed 4 or 5 times. Just go back, say, here's your closing disclosure. You can find that on page one. In that case, you're showing them something that is a material fact. It's something that is static. There's no variable to it. And they are seeking the answer based on what you're showing. That will keep you on the safe side of UPL. So hopefully that answers your questions on, you know, hey, we can't explain this. Earlier in our course, very much earlier on, was explaining if those signing agents that say, I'm not here to explain documents, I'm only here to collect signatures. Well, guess what? If I'm a homeowner, I'll print the 133 pages at the UPS store, at FedEx office, and I'll go find a notary that says, look, here's 150 pages. Just need these four notarized. This is why you're different than John, the normal notary. So again, here's your closing disclosure, kind of present it that way. This answers all their questions and gives them the opportunity up front to make any objections, if they're a lender on the phone if needed, and what have you. Most of the time, this is the response you'll get. Oh yeah, I've already seen that. I'm good. Okay, let me go and collect that check for 14,147. Why I want you to collect that up front, if you're like Jake, you have a bad habit where you get ready to leave, or you've already left, you're like, I forgot to collect those funds. It's a very bad habit of mine. So I'm going to practice what I preach and tell you that's one more reason to collect that in advance. All right, moving right along. And again, assuming you can put that in order and it's not going to upset your hiring party, then you're great. If they want you to not take it out of order, then just put a little post-it note that sticks out and label it number one. Then when you're done signing it, put it back in the closing package and then just move forward. The next one in Texas, we have this for disclosure, and most of you will have experience seeing this because you're not just going to be handling loans in your home state. People travel, so you very well will see this. You see a Texas property. This just piggybacks that closing disclosure, and it speaks Texan. The way it works in Texas is, well, let me back up. The closing disclosure is a uniform document for any US territory. So this puts the lenders on the same playing field in their disclosures to the consumer. Well, the Texas disclosure says, hey, y'all, howdy, we're from Texas. We do things a little different. And this is how we do our breakdown. Same information, same net result, just a different way of presenting the numbers. If you want to confidently say it just like that, that's all you have to. But it's just going to show the title insurance premium and then the recording fees and a few of the things with the real estate commissions are being split. So obviously you can look at the document and I'll show you later how to explain this because I know you guys are going to sleep many nights. You may see this, you may never not. If you are in Texas, you will. This is literally like part of the CD. But that's overwhelming. I'm going to give you some tips later how to explain these documents that are foreign to any of us. All right. Then there's a link there to learn more about the CD. The next one's the payment letter. And the reason why I like to recommend this is number two in the order. On that closing disclosure, it's going to show them their amount that they're going to borrow that does not include us. It's just the principal and interest only. Further down, it says, okay, here's your principal and interest plus your escrows. Here's your grand payment. Well, when people buy a house, the escrows throw them off because they could have gone up on the taxes in between they were shopping or whatever. So this gives the borrower the opportunity to see an itemization or a breakdown rather for their total payment. So in the CD, it would combine this 104.67, this 270, and just say, boom, here's your escrows. This one says, hey, of your 300 plus dollars, 104 goes to your homeowner's insurance monthly, and 270 goes towards your taxes. And those of you in states that have a unique property tax cycle frequency, this may be broken down to a half year, second year. Those of you on the coastal properties or along any ocean side, usually there's going to be more coverage, wind, hail, storm. Those of you in California, you'll see the earthquake coverage and things like that. But nonetheless, you're not explaining this to them. You're just saying, okay, you signed the closing disclosure. Here's your first payment letter. This is going to recap your first payments due December 1st, 2012. And if you want to, you can say, okay, it mentions the 15th day of the month. Here's more of a breakdown. If you need to fill this information out, please look this over if it applies. And then I need your signature, Mr. Smith, and the date right next to your signature on page two, please. You pass it along, it comes back. And again, if they've seen that closing disclosure and they're good with it, then they're okay, great. What's the next document?